A royal bloodline, a hidden heir, and a terrifying secret buried for generations. What was King Charles's final wish, and why did it leave Prince William and Harry frozen in fear? What they uncovered deep beneath the palace grounds will shake the monarchy to its core. Stay with us, because what happens next, no one was prepared for. Princess Anne sat in the dimly lit study, the air heavy with an unsettling silence. The old grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly, its rhythmic chimes echoing off the stone walls, each tick sending a wave of cold dread through the room. She looked out the window at the bleak night sky, the stars obscured by clouds, as though nature itself were holding its breath. It had been days since the king had passed. His death had come suddenly, the kind of suddenness that left the royal family reeling. The public mourned, as did the world. Yet, in the quiet halls of the palace, only Princess Anne knew what the king had truly wanted before he died. And it was something she was determined to keep hidden, until now. Anne's hands shook as she lifted the crumpled piece of paper from her desk. It was the king's final wish, scrawled hastily in his unmistakable hand. Her eyes traced over the words again, the weight of them sinking deeper into her chest with each passing second. William and Harry must know. The king had written. The sentence had been clear, but the meaning was cryptic. Why had the king felt it so important for his sons to learn this in the final moments of his life? She had been there when it happened. She had seen the look in her brother's eyes as he gasped his last breath, his body failing him as his final words left his lips. A confession. A secret too powerful to be shared until the time was right. A secret she would never have expected. When she shared it with William and Harry, both of whom had gathered to discuss the king's affairs in the days following his death, their reactions were not what she expected. William had gone pale, his jaw tightening, while Harry stared at her, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "You can't be serious, and," William had said, his voice shaking, This is madness," and had been resolute, however. She couldn't ignore the urgency in her father's voice when he spoke those words. It was as though he was warning them about something far darker, something that had been buried for years, perhaps decades. Her mind raced. The king had always been a man of many secrets. But this was something entirely different. William and Harry were not the only ones who had been left in the dark. The courtiers, the staff, even the closest of advisors were unaware of what lay behind those last words. It was a truth so terrifying that it could bring the entire royal family to its knees, shaking the very foundations of the monarchy itself. As Anne sat there, pondering the fate of her family, the door to the study creaked open. William stepped in, his face drawn, his features contorted with a mixture of anger and fear. Harry followed behind him, his expression no less severe. It was time to face the truth, no matter how harrowing it would be. William's eyes locked with Anne's, a deep, unsettling silence hanging between them. The air seemed to thicken with every passing second. He had always trusted his sister, but this was different. He felt as though the ground beneath his feet was beginning to crack. "And," William began, his voice low, almost too soft for the weight of the words he was about to speak. "You've been saying that our father's last wish was meant for us, but you haven't told us everything," and glanced at Harry, who was standing a few steps behind William. His face was pale, his eyes wide with apprehension. He looked like a man teetering on the edge of a precipice, unwilling to fall but unable to look away. "I know," Anne whispered. "I know this is hard to believe, but it's the truth. What he wanted to tell us. It's not just a request. It's a warning. She watched William's brow furrow in confusion. A warning. His voice barely carried the weight of disbelief. What could he have possibly meant by that? And stood up slowly, pacing the small room, her steps measured and deliberate. Her mind was racing, piecing together the fragments of that final conversation with the king. The room grew colder, and the shadows on the walls seemed to stretch unnaturally. Father spoke of something that happened many years ago, something hidden, buried so deep within the monarchy's history that it was thought to be forgotten. Harry's voice cut through the thick tension, his words coming out in a whisper, barely audible. What's so terrifying that our father would go to his grave with it? What could possibly destroy everything we've known? Anne's gaze fell to the crumpled note in her hand, and she hesitated for a moment, as though the weight of the next words might shatter everything. The king, he told me that the throne, our very bloodline, is not as pure as we've been led to believe. There was something, or rather someone, in our past, someone who shouldn't have existed but does. The room fell into a deathly silence as her words hung in the air. For the first time in a long while, William looked afraid, his hands trembling ever so slightly. Harry, on the other hand, looked more confused than afraid, the reality of what Anne had said beginning to settle on him. "You're saying there's someone else?" William asked, his voice trembling as he tried to piece together the significance of Anne's revelation. "Someone who's tied to the throne? Someone who has a right to it?" Anne nodded, her heart racing. "Yes, and it's not just anyone. This person is far closer to us than we ever imagined. Someone from within the royal family itself." Harry took a step forward, his voice edged with both frustration and fear. "Why are you telling us this now? Why wasn't it shared before?" And paused, looking between the two men she had known her entire life, the ones she had once trusted more than anyone. But now everything was different. The truth, once revealed, could never be undone. Because it's too late now. The king knew it was time. He knew something was about to happen. We aren't the only ones who know about this. There are others, people who have been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. She could see the fear in William's eyes, the kind of fear that had nothing to do with the palace or the public's reaction. It was the fear of something darker, something that could unravel not just their family but the entire monarchy. Harry, too, was starting to grasp the magnitude of what she was saying. William stepped closer, his voice growing louder, more insistent. "What does this mean for us, Anne? What are we supposed to do with this information?" And shook her head, her expression hardening. "We don't have a choice, William. We must confront this, even if it means destroying everything we've known. There are people out there who would stop at nothing to claim what they believe is rightfully theirs. And if we don't act quickly, we might lose everything." The weight of Anne's words settled over the room like a thick fog, and for a moment, there was nothing but the oppressive silence. The air felt still, suffocating, as if even the shadows themselves were holding their breath. William's face paled further, and Harry stepped back, running a hand through his hair in disbelief. "So, what exactly are we dealing with?" William finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who is this person, and why have we never heard of them before?" Anne's fingers clenched around the crumpled paper in her hands. She took a slow breath, feeling the sharp sting of the truth seeping through her every nerve. "His name is Edward," she said, her voice barely audible. "A son of one of our ancestors, born outside the royal lineage, but tied to it nonetheless." She paused, watching the shock flicker across their faces. "He was kept hidden, for fear of what he might do if he ever learned of his bloodline. But now that time has come." Harry shook his head, unable to process it. Edward? But why haven't we heard of him? Why would father keep something like this a secret? Anne's expression hardened, her gaze distant as if she could already feel the cold grip of the past tightening around her. Because Edward was no ordinary son. He was different, dangerous. Father thought if he could keep it buried, no one would ever be the wiser. But now, it seems, the truth is coming to light. William's eyes narrowed. What makes him dangerous? And took a deep breath, her heart racing with a sudden, unsettling realization. Edward was not just a descendant. He was born with a claim to the throne, and the blood he shares with us is pure, but twisted. There are rumors, whispers of an old prophecy, one that says the true ruler of the monarchy is not chosen by birthright alone, but by the one who can carry the darkest bloodline of the royal family. And Edward, he might be the key. Harry stepped back, his eyes wide, the disbelief turning to fear. You're saying he could take the throne from us? That he has a right to it? And nodded grimly. Yes, and there are others who know about him. People who have been waiting for the right moment to reveal his existence. They'll stop at nothing to see him crowned. And they believe now is the time. The words hung in the air, thick with the kind of fear that paralyzed the soul. William's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place, but the enormity of the situation was overwhelming. So, what do we do now? His voice was strained, his eyes darting between Anne and Harry, and met his gaze, her expression cold and resolute. We find Edward, before he finds us. The three of them stood there, trapped in the shadow of a family secret that could tear their world apart. But Anne knew there was no turning back. The storm had come, and it would consume everything in its path unless they acted fast. They had no choice but to dive deeper into the darkness, to confront the bloodline, the prophecy, and the unseen hands that were pulling the strings. But as Anne felt the weight of the king's final wish on her shoulders, she couldn't shake the nagging thought that perhaps the secret had always been destined to come out, no matter how much they tried to bury it. With every moment that passed, they drew closer to a confrontation they could not avoid. A confrontation that would test the very fabric of the royal family. And in the end, Anne wondered whether they would all survive the coming revelation. Would they rise to face it, or would it tear them apart, just as the king had feared? The next few days passed in a blur of tense meetings, hurried preparations, and whispered conversations behind closed doors. The royal family, once so sure of its legacy, now found itself in the grip of a growing terror, one that threatened to expose everything they had worked for, everything they had fought to preserve. And William and Harry knew they had little time. Every move had to be calculated, every decision precise, or else the consequences would be dire. The mention of Edward had set something in motion, something darker than they could have ever imagined. There were whispers among the staff, reports of strangers appearing at the palace gates, of men in shadowy corners of the kingdom asking too many questions, seeking answers to secrets long buried. It wasn't long before Anne's worst fears began to take shape. Late one night, as she pored over the king's journals, searching for anything that could provide a clue about Edward's whereabouts, a sharp knock at the door startled her. Her pulse quickened as she quickly hid the journal beneath a stack of papers, her mind racing. She had been so consumed by the urgency of the situation that she hadn't heard the footsteps approaching. "Who is it?" she called, her voice steady, though her heart beat wildly in her chest. The door creaked open, and there stood William, his face grave, his eyes shadowed with worry. He didn't say anything at first. His silence spoke volumes. The air between them was thick with unspoken fear. "We need to talk," he said finally, his voice low, his tone serious, and rose from her seat, nodding in agreement. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. What is it? Has something happened? William stepped inside and closed the door behind him, his face hardening. We found something. A lead. His gaze locked onto hers, dark and urgent. And it's not what we expected, and felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? William pulled out a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, unfolding it carefully. As he laid it on the table in front of her, Anne's eyes widened in shock. It was an old map of the kingdom, one that she had seen in her father's private archives. But this one was different. It was marked with strange symbols, and a thick red circle had been drawn around a specific location deep in the heart of the countryside, an area that was off-limits to anyone outside of the royal family. Anne's stomach turned. This was hidden from us. It gets worse, William said, his voice tight. There are instructions written by someone within the court, someone close. They've been guiding us toward this moment for years. And now / it seems they're ready to act. Anne's hands trembled as she read the words on the map. The instructions were clear. There was no ambiguity in them. Whoever had written them knew exactly what they were doing and what they were preparing for. They're planning something, Anne whispered, her mind racing. They've been planning this for far too long. And Edward, he's part of it. William nodded grimly. We have to go there. Tonight. Harry, who had been standing silently in the doorway, stepped forward. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with a mixture of fear and determination. Are we really going to risk everything by confronting this? If we're wrong, if this isn't a trap, what does that mean for us? For the throne? And met his gaze. She could see the hesitation in his eyes, but she also saw the flicker of resolve. We have no choice, Harry. We can't keep running from the truth. If we don't act now, we might lose everything. Our family, our legacy, our future. There was a long pause as the three of them stood there, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Then William spoke again, his voice hard. Then we leave now. The cold night air hit them like a slap in the face as they made their way toward the waiting vehicle that would take them deep into the heart of the kingdom. The roads grew darker, the trees along the path thick with shadows, as if the forest itself were watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The tension was palpable as they traveled, the minutes stretching into hours, and all Anne could think about was the impending confrontation. What would they find at the marked location? Who was behind this plot, and how long had it been in the making? As they neared the destination, a sense of dread began to creep over them, the weight of their actions pressing heavily on their shoulders. The stakes were higher than ever, and as the vehicle slowed, Anne knew that the answers they were about to uncover could change everything. They were on the brink of something far more terrifying than they had ever imagined. The bloodline, the prophecy, Edward, it was all coming to a head, and they had no way of knowing if they would survive the storm that was about to break. The vehicle came to a stop at the edge of a dense forest, its towering trees casting long, jagged shadows across the road. The air was cold, biting, as if the very night itself were warning them to turn back. But there was no turning back now. And William and Harry stepped out into the thick silence, the crunch of gravel beneath their boots the only sound that broke the stillness. Stay alert, William said, his voice firm. We don't know what we're walking into. Anne nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never felt more uncertain in her life, yet there was something deeply compelling about this moment. Something that told her they were on the cusp of a revelation that would change everything. They made their way toward the heart of the forest, following the map's instructions, the ground beneath them soft with moss and the thick underbrush pressing against their legs. The further they walked, the darker it became, the trees blocking out what little light the moon provided. It was as if the forest itself were closing in on them, suffocating them with its ancient, watchful presence. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a clearing, the air suddenly thick with an eerie stillness. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone structure, an old, crumbling monument that seemed almost out of place in this forgotten part of the kingdom. Its surface was covered in ivy, and the faintest trace of moss clung to its edges, as if it had been here for centuries. And took a step forward, her breath catching in her throat. There was something unnatural about this place. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and a deep sense of dread began to coil in her stomach. This wasn't just a location, it was a symbol of something much darker than she had anticipated. "This is it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is where it all began." William and Harry exchanged uneasy glances, both of them clearly feeling the same sense of foreboding that and did. The monument seemed to pulse with an energy that was almost alive, as if it were waiting for them, anticipating their arrival. "What do we do now?" Harry asked, his voice tight, and took a deep breath, steeling herself. "We find the truth, whatever it is." She approached the stone structure, her hand trembling as she reached out to touch the cool surface. The moment her fingers made contact, a strange sensation washed over her, a sudden wave of vertigo that left her reeling. Her vision blurred for an instant, and she had to steady herself against the stone to keep from falling. "Anne!" William's voice cracked through the fog of dizziness, and she felt his hand on her arm, steadying her. She shook her head, trying to clear the disorientation. It's okay," she said, though her voice was shaky. "It's just the energy here. It's overwhelming." William didn't look convinced, but he didn't press her further. Instead, he glanced at the monument with growing suspicion. "What do you think it means, Anne?" "This structure, it's older than the royal archives. It's not just some forgotten landmark," and nodded slowly, still feeling the lingering disorientation. "It's not just a monument," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her realization. "It's a marker, a tomb, a place to keep the secret buried." Harry stepped closer, his expression grim. "So this is where where he was hidden." Anne's mind raced. The thought was terrifying, but it made sense. The structure seemed to hold an aura of something ancient, something that had been locked away for so long that even the royal family had forgotten its true purpose. But Edward's bloodline was a part of that history, a history that had been buried so deep that even those who should have known about it had been kept in the dark. "We need to get inside," Anne said, her voice suddenly filled with determination. "There's something here, something that will tell us everything." Without another word, she stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. The stone monument loomed above her, a silent sentinel of a past too dangerous to forget. As she approached, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. A faint symbol carved into the stone, barely visible in the moonlight. It looked almost like a crest, a twisted version of the royal seal, distorted and altered in a way that was both haunting and deliberate. Anne's fingers traced the edges of the symbol, and with a sudden grinding noise, the stone began to shift. A section of the monument slid open, revealing a dark passageway that seemed to lead deep into the earth. The air that rushed out from the opening was cold and damp, carrying with it the scent of something ancient and decayed. "This is it," William said, his voice laced with both fear and resolve. "There's no turning back now," and stepped into the darkness, her heart racing as she descended into the unknown. The passage seemed endless, winding down into the depths of the earth, until finally, they reached a chamber so vast that its farthest corners were lost to shadow. In the center of the chamber lay a stone altar, and upon it, a single ancient tome. The book's cover was adorned with the same twisted crest they had seen earlier, its pages yellowed and worn with age. This was the key, the final piece of the puzzle that would reveal the truth of Edward's bloodline. And stepped forward, her hand shaking as she reached for the book. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, the weight of a secret that had been buried for centuries, waiting for the right moment to emerge. As her fingers touched the cover, a sudden coldness filled the air, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble. Something was stirring, something ancient and restless. And just as she opened the book, the truth, began to unfold before her eyes. The moment and opened the tome, the chamber groaned with a low, ancient sound, as if the very earth were remembering something it had tried desperately to forget. A cold wind spiraled upward from the darkness, rustling the pages as if guided by invisible hands. The air grew impossibly heavy, and an oppressive stillness gripped the space, like time itself had frozen in reverence or in fear. William stepped beside her, his eyes scanning the brittle parchment. Harry hovered just behind, watching in disbelief as strange, unfamiliar characters shimmered across the pages in deep crimson ink, and could barely read them, but she understood enough. These were confessions, accounts, warnings. The words seemed to burn themselves into her mind as she read aloud in a trembling whisper. In the year of the Black Solstice, a child born of royal blood and ancient pact, not recognized, not mourned, kept beneath stone and oath until the time of reckoning. Suddenly, a rumble echoed through the chamber. Dust fell from the ceiling. Something was waking. The text continued, darker with each line. Asterisk, when the throne is weak, and the blood grows thin, the forgotten shall rise to reclaim the price owed in blood and fire. Asterisk, and froze. The realization struck her like a hammer. Edward wasn't just a hidden heir, he was the product of a pact. A centuries-old deal made between the crown and something far older, something not entirely human. The king had known. That was why he whispered his final wish. He hadn't just wanted them to know the truth. He wanted them to prepare for what would come next.